Hey everybody, today on the show we have Didi Medina. He's a product designer, also a good friend of mine, moved from New York City to Jerusalem a year or two ago, and we immediately became friends. And he was visiting my office and we had a really great discussion about making your freelance business better, pricing, how to create leverage, really interesting stuff. Enjoy it. Didi, what is up? Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Yeah.
What's the show called?
The show is called Blind Date.
Blind Date.
Yeah, which is like how we met. When you kind of, it's like somebody introduced us. I don't even remember
Tinder.
who that was. Yeah, who introduced us? Do you remember?
Who introduced us? Roy.
Right. It was part of your I'm coming to Israel. I want to
Yep.
meet everybody tour.
Yes, that was. It's funny calling it a tour. Yeah, it was definitely part of the road show.
Cool. We were just talking about. So we're gonna let's just continue the conversation where we picked up before we started recording. You just had a workshop in one of the biggest UX conventions here in Israel for freelancers. That was about what? About processes for freelancers. How would you frame what that workshop was about?
Yeah. First, for clarity, the workshop is called UX Salon, and it's not for freelancers. It's for designers in general.
Yeah.
But the workshop that I did was for freelancers. The goal of the workshop was to teach freelancers how to work on their business.
Okay.
Specifically designers, obviously. So it's more business operations for product designers, UX designers, UI designers, however you classify yourself as a freelancer.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. And you were mentioning to me that you think that a lot of designers struggle with value pricing or that it takes too much courage. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to like just teach value pricing, right?
Well, I do. So there's two things here. It's easy for somebody that's really popular in the industry, where he has people coming at him right and left and saying, hey, we want to work with you. Please work with us. And then at that moment, that person has a lot of leverage, right? He can throw whatever price he wants and get away with it, right? So there's two things here. It's like, if you have a lot of leverage, if you have a lot of influence on the industry, it's easier to just price whatever you want to get away with it.
Okay.
Right.
Do you consider value pricing as price whatever you want for it?
No, I don't consider that, but I'm saying more on a high level, charging people expensive rates.
All right.
Is hard unless you have leverage. Some people have it coming into the meeting. Some people have to generate it once they're in the meeting. All right. So let's differentiate. So some people, they talk about how they do value-based pricing and they have a very strong sphere of influence. The clients are coming to them. They're kind of gung-ho on saying, we want to work with you specifically. Coming into a situation like that, you don't really have to try hard. You can give an expensive rate for the most part and get away with it.
Right. I want to say from my perspective, first of all, like when I learned value pricing, it was more like you have to frame it as in, your website is going to make $1 million. So that makes sense that I can charge $100K for it. But I know from my experience, and I have clients coming over to me and want to work with me, and I do charge them high prices. You do have to rationalize it in a way to make it make sense to them. Yeah, and also expensive prices can also be part of like your brand. Your brand is, I'm a very expensive person if you want to work with. That I'm not sure that's exactly value pricing, right? Or
I wouldn't say that's exactly value pricing. You can position yourself as like the luxury creme de la creme, freelancer. You can do that, but unless the person who's hiring you can justify that, if he doesn't believe you're the creme de la creme, you can't just be because you say you are.
Right.
The person needs to believe that. You're not going to get away with charging the prices. You'll have all those prices on your price list on your website if you have that, but nobody will pay it. So it's good for nothing. There's a technicalities of value-based pricing, which is a simple concept of behavioral economics of anchoring, right? You're saying I'm adding this amount of ROI to your company. I'm charging a small subset of that, which is like 1%, right? So the concept's relatively simple. The thing is, 1% could still be an obscene amount. It can be like $50,000, whereas if you charged by the hour, it would have been somewhere close to $5,000, $7,000, right? So if you're a freelancer and you want to get away with charging with 50,000 when the project should cost 5,000 by the hour, even if you showed the ROI, a lot of times that's not enough, right? Because the founder knows that. He knows he can get the project done for 5,000. So why is he paying you more? That's the question. So there has to be a specific agenda by the person who's hiring you to want you specifically. So this comes down to leverage. Some people have it coming into the room, some people don't. So I think value-based pricing is taught from a technical standpoint. It's the idea of anchoring, but not everybody can get away with simply saying the ROI is this amount, I'm charging a small subset of that. Some people have the leverage to get away with that. Some people don't. So
okay, so I guess it means that the question is, how do you create the leverage?
Yes. So that is an important question. So do you want to talk about the technicalities of value-based pricing just on a high level, and then we'll get to the leverage part?
Yeah, let's do that.
So like we said, value-based pricing is relatively simple. Alan Weiss wrote the book $1 Million Consulting, I believe it's called, or $1 Million Consultant. Highly recommend reading it. And it simply states, you try to compute the ROI of the project, of the output of the project. And if it has an impact of $1 million, for conservative sakes, you just cut that number in half, right? And then once you have that number, you say, okay, fine, I'm gonna charge a fraction of that, a really small fraction. This thing is, relative. You can charge, if the project is worth 300,000, you can charge 5%. If it's worth like $2 million, you can even bring it down to 1%. It really doesn't matter. It's pretty fluid. It's whatever you're willing to get away with, you can go with. Once you have that number,
which is, by the way, not always easy to calculate, right? When it comes to brand, for example, might be vaguer than when it comes to sales from an e-commerce website.
Sure. So yes and no. So I guess this is a really important thing. Designers and developers tend to understand design and engineering really, really well. Business, on the other hand, or the economics of the business they're serving, not so much. Right. So if you want to do value-based pricing, you have to really have a good grasp on how things affect the business. Right. So you can't say, oh, my designs are worth X amount because it helps the business in some abstract way. You have to be very, very clear as to how the project you're going to be working on either helps them get to a certain goal. So a very simple example of this. I had a client about last year. They came to me and they said, hey, we need a landing page for our brand. And I was like, okay, cool. Why do you need it? Right. This is a really simple example. And they were like, oh, we need it so we can come off like professional to investors, and we're looking to close our Series A. I'm like, how much is your Series A looking to be? And they're like, we're expecting it to be around 1 to 2 million. Right. So I'm like, why can't you just go raise that money without the landing page? And they're like, no, we'll come off like a mom and pop shop. Like, we don't have our stuff together. We have a lot of technology that we already built, but people assess like the surface. Right. And I was like, okay, cool. So let's just stop there. Right. If they don't have a landing page, they believe if they don't have it, they're not going to get their funding, which is relatively true. And they need it in order to close a $1 to $2 million round. How much is that worth? Right. I would say it's worth at least $100,000. Right. If I literally went up to an investor and said, hey, I have a company for you to invest in, and they were convinced that it was a good investment and they gave that company $2 million, me as the broker of that deal should get around 1 to 2%. Right. That's the thing I would get. Mm-hmm. So with when you have like a project that you're working on that's worth about $100,000 in that instance, you can say, okay, I'm going to charge 1% of that. Right. Because you're the designer. You didn't actually get them to invest. Right. There's a lot of other things.
Yeah. It's not based on performance.
Exactly. But you play a major role in that. So they might give you some pushback and they might say, hey, why am I paying you $10,000 for a landing page? Right. And because you're not getting us the funding. And you'd be like, well, if I can get you the funding, I would charge $100,000. That's the broker fee. Right. I'm not doing that. So I'm charging a small subset of that. Right. And that's the investment you're making. So that's how you'll get that. You can also ask questions along the vein of, what is the effort that you've done to date? Right. So you can assess the amount of money they've spent on employment and resources to work on this project so far. So if they tell you, oh, we worked on it for about 5 months with like 6 engineers, 1 designer, and we're still not making a lot of progress. You're like, oh, what was it like working with the designer you had? Why did it fall short? They're like, oh, he was a really good designer, but he really didn't know how to communicate with engineers. And you're like, okay, cool. Like you're getting a bunch of information, but you know now that they spent 5 months working on this project. And if something doesn't change on the design side, they'll work another 5 months and they'll burn the same amount of money. You can compute their salary. So you can just say, okay, on average, 20,000, go conservative. Check if you're going in Israel. If you're going in America, you say, okay, average person, $7,000 to $10,000 salary per month. Multiply that by 6, by the amount of people on the team, and multiply that by 5, which is the amount of months. And
you're
now you have
a millionaire.
You're already at $1 million. You can compute other things, which is the opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of not having this done, right, in a certain time? You can add that and add that. At a certain point, I actually think you start getting to really obscene numbers, and it's really easy to make an argument of how much something is worth.
Yeah.
Especially for early stage startups, because they're moving really quickly. They're adding a lot of value really, really fast. So yeah, some basic questions. Observing the current situation would yield some good results.
All right. But now you say most designers actually struggle to put that in practice. Is that because of a courage thing, or is it the leverage thing? Why is it so hard to actually?
Well, you're overriding your natural behavior, which most designers start by saying, okay, fine, what did you do? How are we going to solve it differently? And you're always like Bob the Builder. You're just like, all right, what am I going to create? How I'm going to solve this? And that's the way designers and engineers think, right? Whereas think about it kind of like an investor, right? You're not going to spend your money, right, until you understand what is the landscape and you sit back. You're not trying to take any action yet. You're just trying to observe. I find that most designers don't know how to do this well. They would be like, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried that? That's not solving, but that's like not that far from solving either. Whereas if someone says, we tried this, and you can easily ask, oh, what inconveniences has that caused? Again, you're not solving anything. You're just trying to understand the capacity of the problem and the way they perceive it, right? Not the way you perceive it. So I think that's the first break point where designers and engineers do it wrong. Their job is to fix things, and that's the way they think. You're going to get to that. You really have to just like pause and ask questions about the current situation. So that's against your natural programming. So it's going to take a little bit of practice. All right. You might slip a couple of times. The next thing is it's habitual. You're used to getting paid a certain amount, so you might not believe that you're entitled to more, right?
Yeah.
And if I went up to you and said, hey, I find like a lot of people who ask me like, how much is a project worth? How much is a fair price? And most people hate my answer because I usually say, you're worth whatever you can get away with.
Exactly.
So
I like the Jay-Z quote, like, it's not how much you're worth, it's how much you negotiate, or something like that.
Something like that, exactly. And that's very situational. You might find that some client has really deep pockets and is willing to invest into a higher minimum commitment, go for that, right? So the project might still only be 10 hours worth of work, and that's all you need. But you might say, hey, they're a big company. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. Let me tell them that my minimum project is 50 hours. And I'll tell them, listen, I'll do the project you want for 10 hours. And you have 40 hours to use whenever you want. But you got 50 hours of committed like cost. That's still better.
But that's still bringing it down to like hours.
That's still hours, right?
Yeah.
So, well, that was more to explain the principle of like you're worth whatever you can get away with, right? But back to like value-based pricing, the main thing is most designers and engineers don't ask enough questions, observe the problem. That's their first setback. The second thing is it just takes a lot of courage because you're used to being valued a certain way. You have your beliefs. You believe that every employer is not going to be willing to pay you $300 more. Right. And that goes on the assumption that humans are rational. Right. What I'm telling you is to exploit the irrational. Right. The market says you're worth 300 shek per hour, $100 per hour. You can get away with a lot more, and you can get someone to be really excited to pay that amount. You don't believe me? Somehow people pay, $400 for t-shirts that have rips in them.
Right.
So how is that possible?
It's true. Value is perceptional. But I know from experience, like the first time that I ever tried doing kind of value pricing, and I think in general, every time you raise your price, doesn't matter. like it's really, really scary the first time, and there's just no way around that. So that's something that you just have to deal with. I guess no matter what the framework is, even if you're charging by the hour and now you want to move from $50 an hour to $100, $200 an hour, it's still going to be very scary.
Right. I think to that extent, one of my favorite tips is to say, try it while you're doing good. Right. Most people don't experiment while they're doing good. Right. They cruise on the good times. When you have clients and things are going good, start getting experimental, because a lot of these concepts will come down to courage. Right. And seeing is believing. You just have to do it once well and see it work. And the second you see it work, you're like, okay, if it worked once,
and you have to say it like you believe it. Right. Otherwise, they're going to know like, no, he's just trying. Exactly. He doesn't deserve it.
It comes down to the salesmanship, especially when you're having the conversations. It's like, how confident do you sound talking about how much you charge? Do you sound assured of yourself? If you don't, it's like the employer might see it as he doesn't sound too sure. Is he even going to give me what I want? Yeah. Or is he just going to charge me a lot? So sounding sure of yourself without sounding cocky is important to evoke trust and confidence. And yeah, when you're doing good, if you have a client, you have an anchor client, you have your baseline covered, start getting experimental. Like, tell yourself it's okay if I don't get this, but the whole premise of doing this entire exercise is to prove to myself that it's possible.
Right.
So those are times that everybody gets, right? We all have our down times, but we all have our up times. And when we're in our up times, we don't take full advantage of that. So next time you have your uptime, which will come around, take advantage of it and get experimental. That would be the first thing. That'll be the easiest way to break into it. It's much harder to try things that scare you when everything seems like it's going to shit.
Yeah.
And then like we'll come back to like leverage, right? So you understand now the concepts of value-based pricing. Leverage, which is, even if you understand it, even if you communicate it well, you can get to the end of the proposal, the negotiation phase, and the employer is very much asking themselves, hey, okay, I understand the ROI. It's very objective. He cut out half of the cost of the ROI just to remove bias. So I can't say he's wrong. Clearly, there's at least this amount of value going to be added. 2% sounds like a reasonable investment. But honestly, I still think I can get someone to do it for $5,000 instead of $50,000. So now it comes down to whether or not they're going to hire you or someone else. So this is what's happening, is you're still being anchored against market. Even though they can understand the pricing, they still don't understand why they want you over some other Joe Schmo in the market. This is what is referred to as leverage. Who are you to them, and why is it that they want to like hire you? Now, why do they want to outsource? If you're getting compared to like 10 other people that can potentially do it, if they believe that they genuinely can just start asking around their friends and find another freelancer within, I don't know, a month, and that person will charge by the hour and they'll get a cheaper rate, they're going to do it, right? So why should they go with you? And a lot of times,
why would they go with you?
I would say this: a lot of times people meet me and they don't know me, so I can assess that. Sometimes I come in from a position of leverage. Maybe a VC introduces me to their portfolio company, and at that point I have a lot of influence. I just walk in with power, right? Other situations is where I meet someone random, they don't know me, and they're interested in potentially talking about an opportunity, and I have to build leverage, right? Sometimes, even though in certain situations I have the benefit of coming from a position of power, I find myself in a lot of situations still where I don't have any leverage walking in, but I still believe I can get this person to sign on the dotted line for a significant more than he ever contemplated.
So how do you build that?
Delay, right? So it's something I call it pitching from the inside, right? By the time you get to a point where you write a contract or a proposal, you already want to be part of their team. Right? Or the way they perceive you is not as like an outsider, but an insider, right? So the way I do that is I try to do a discovery phase before I write a contract.
For free or?
No, I charge a flat rate for it, right. A flat rate for it. But the way I do it is I say, hey, if you sign the contract, I'll take the amount you paid for the discovery phase and credit towards the contract. Okay. So that way they don't give me like, oh, why are we paying for research? Or like, let's just start the project. And then it makes it easier to sell it, where you're like, hey, I just want to make sure the proposal covers exactly what we're going to get done. You're going to have pretty much like a PRD, product requirement document, or like scope of work, and you'll be way more clear. So as a founder, you'll be more reassured that what I'm quoting you is not fluff. Yeah. Nobody can really tell you what needs to get done in 2 days of assessment work. That's just not going to happen. Any good CEO knows that too. So if you tell them, hey, I want more time to really be able to tell you exactly what we're going to get done, how long it's going to take, and so you're more confident making that investment, I think every CEO will be like, oh, I like this guy.
Okay, so the strategy is get yourself in the door with a small scoped price, like that's flat priced.
I charge a flat free. Right?
That is not, by the way, value price. This is just
no.
Here's what I do. I charge 10K or whatever for the discovery phase.
That's a lot.
Let's do it.
But I would go somewhere between like 500 and 1,000.
Okay.
Right.
Which is basically usually just one meeting, or
no. I would say it's about 10 hours worth of work over a 2-week span.
Okay.
Right.
So that's low hourly rate, I guess.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Right. This is not intended to be for a profit.
Okay.
What you're creating here is leverage on two fronts. One, you're charging. So by the time they get to the negotiation phase, they're going to be more concerned about not losing the $1,000 they invested, even though it's a $50,000 contract.
And you're already in their systems.
Exactly.
Now it's just like a click of a button.
Exactly. And the second thing is, they get to work with you for like 2 weeks, and it's really
it's like free trial.
Exactly.
Type of thing. Yeah.
It allows. So let's understand this. When people try to get clients, what do they try to sell? What are they selling?
The service, I guess, or
their talent, their experience.
Yeah.
Right. That is good. There's one thing that's better: trust. Right. Trust is significantly higher leverage than talent. Right. So you can be in a meeting and you can try to show them your portfolio. You're selling talent. You're like, here, look at what I can do. Right. Trust is still significantly higher leverage. If someone likes you, it doesn't matter how good your work is, just trusts you.
Yeah.
He is more likely to hire you over everybody else. And proof of this is like, look at every massive enterprise that has a contract signed with another company that is super outdated technology and they don't shift. Because they trust them. They already have a working relationship. People don't fear change. They fear ambiguity. So if you become familiar to them, you're the most likely to get hired. That's
a really interesting point. And I don't think I've ever heard of anybody doing that. Did you pick that up for somebody, or you're just like?
No, I saw it kind of, I read between the lines. I really sat down and I tried to understand. I read a couple of books in my life, and
which one? Let's talk about that. You mentioned the $1 Million Consultant.
$1 Million Consultant. So there's 4 books that I recommend reading and then trying to derive your own ideas from. So $1 Million Consultant, that would give you a lot of things to start with.
I couldn't read it, by the way. Let's talk about it. I read a lot of things. I read Pitch Anything as well, but $1 Million Consultant, I don't know, maybe it was too technical or boring, even though I follow Alan Weiss on Twitter and he's very interesting, but I couldn't get through this book. So what was your takeaway from that, for example?
Takeaway from that, from $1 Million Consultant?
Yeah, first, like 2 things that stuck with you and that you're using. Like you've mentioned value pricing, obviously.
Value-based pricing, and the accelerant curve.
What is that?
The accelerant curve is this concept that Alan Weiss talks about, where you sell multiple products to people and they're on a curve. Every product should lead them to want to buy the next.
Okay.
At the top of the funnel, you have low intimacy, low cost, right? Okay. So say YouTube channel.
Right.
Right. And then as you go down the spectrum, the cost increases, the intimacy increases. Right. Okay. And once somebody's within your accelerant curve, it makes it much easier to go to the next thing because they're already in your customer circle.
Right.
This concept is proved to work from behavioral economics. Right. So a lot of the stuff that Alan Weiss did works because of very, very basic principles of behavioral economics and behavioral psychology.
So what you've mentioned before as like going in with a kind of a low priced thing, do you see that as part of the accelerating curve?
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Cool.
So there's that. There's Pitch Anything.
Pitch Anything.
It's a really, really good book. I wouldn't say Oren Klaff is a psychologist, and he kind of states neuroscience as like a fact. Like I'm not going to explain it. It's just neuroscience, but his ideas are like they very much work. And then if you want to understand the concepts behind the psychology, I highly recommend reading.
Wait, let's discuss this book, because that's actually the book that I read before. Like, I read it on the end of my last full-time job, and I read it just before I had the negotiation, before with the first client that I ever did kind of like value pricing and stuff like that. And I read that. Basically, I had kind of a mixed feeling about it, because he was like teaching you how to act like a jerk to kind of like create this alpha persona, whatever, to create the leverage or whatever. And I was like, oh, he's teaching me to act like a jerk. But I was like, let me try that. And then I had the client meeting, and I was like, keeping him waiting, like managing it to like telling him this and this and that, and doing all the tricks that he kind of mentioned in the book. But oh my God, it just worked.
It does. And I don't recommend anybody needing to be a jerk. Oren Klaff comes from the finance world where,
like Wall Street type of deals.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't genuinely believe he's a jerk. I genuinely believe that you have to adapt to the environment you're in and play their game.
And maybe jerk is just not the right word, but he's like, this is how like alpha males, winner people, dominant people with power act.
He has like
in
Gary
these kind of
like type vibe. You just go at it and you gotta be strong. Like it's very much alpha male, but with a lot of these books, you got to learn how to read between the lines, right? And because he is successful, so there's something he's doing right. And there's a lot of things that don't work for you. But, if you don't like something, a small part of something, just remove that part and keep the rest. And I find that a lot of people look at it and say, if there's one thing I don't like, I'm just giving up on the whole thing.
Right.
So you're going to find things in every ideology, method, or whatever it is that you don't like. And that doesn't mean there aren't things that are worthwhile. So learn to read between the lines, figure out what works for you. So
what is book number 3?
So first, the main takeaway from Pitch Anything is framing.
Right.
It'll teach you really well the idea of framing and how to own the conversation in a way where you don't come off cocky, in my opinion, and the importance of coming off like a leader in the conversation. So ultimately, you're negotiating the terms of how things bounce back. Right. There's a lot of psychology.
And when you say framing, you mean like I'm explaining to you as the client, for example, why this interaction between us or us working together is a really good deal. That's how I frame this.
I feel like your product is kind of like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not good.
Okay.
Right. So you should never be explaining your service and why it's valuable. You should be trying to get them to see that. Right. So framing is the ability to. I'll give an example. My girlfriend, she's in Betzalel, which is an art institute here in Israel. And she's a student, and she applied for a job on Facebook, a design job. And they followed back up and they said, hey, thank you for reaching out. Could you please send us your portfolio? So she was like, what do I do? Right? Because she didn't have a portfolio. So she asked me, what should I do?
Right.
And I'm like, fuck your portfolio. Respond in these words. So I told her, I'd love to share my portfolio. But before I do, I'd like to understand, like learn a little bit about the company, what you guys do, and what specifically you guys are looking for in a graphic designer, because graphic design is like a very broad spectrum. This is what's better known as taking over the frame, right? Because what ended up happening is the guy responds and says, oh, my company does this, that, and the other. So now what actually happened? We just switched roles.
Right.
Now she's interviewing him instead of he's interviewing her. And that makes her perceived as the authoritative figure, right? And the prize, in essence. So that's the framing bit.
Okay.
And she didn't do anything. And she ended up pushing the conversation. She asked a couple of questions. And then eventually she's like, okay, thank you for all that information. I'd love to meet the team in person and get to know you guys a little bit more. The whole entire time she didn't come off cocky. She came off very curious. The person felt reassured that this person wants to know the company, wants to know the products, wants to know the problems, the business goals, all this different stuff. And they were like, yeah, please come for coffee. We'd love to host you, whatever it is. And she went for coffee and she got the gig.
Awesome. Right? Without a portfolio.
Without really showing a portfolio. So that's framing. Now, these are 2 books, $1 Million Consulting and Pitch Anything, that would show you how to put things into practice. But if you want to learn how to read between the lines so you don't do things wrong, so you understand the concepts behind it, read the psychology behind it. So 2 books I highly recommend, which is Predictably Rational by Dan Ariely, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Right.
Dan Ariely is going to be a really fun read. So if you want something more understandable, start there. Thinking Fast and Slow, it's almost like an extensive academic paper.
But I liked it. It's funny.
It's great.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say he's as good at making ideas funny and amusable as Dan Ariely.
All right.
But he is a genius, and he won a Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. So clearly he knows a thing or two. Reading those 2 books, you'll understand, and if you really, really understand them, you can really learn how to read between the lines and say, okay, fine, how do I design a customer experience, which is your client, from the point where I meet them to the point where they sign, that optimize them to want to sign at the best terms at my advantage.
Yeah,
you're designing that. That's a flow. That's a product. If you're a designer,
what do you take away from like these books for people who haven't read them? Like they discuss from an academic, like the experiments that they did, all sorts of biases that people have when they make decisions. So like being afraid of fear of loss, like loss aversion, I think it's called. Like usually you will take the option which is less scary in a sense of like you don't really want to win as much as you want to lose, and all these a lot of concepts. But how do you actually put that into practice when you design that, your customer journey?
So one, the idea of anchoring is explained in Dan Ariely's book, and if you want to know why value-based pricing works, is because of anchoring. Right. But anchors are all over the place. Right. So he said you might be able to anchor the pricing. So now it's rational to the...
An anchor, for those of the people who don't know what anchoring is just like having something to compare the price to when you're thinking about it.
When making a decision, deciding what good or bad is relative to what it's presented next to.
Right.
So we'll give an example. So in Dan Ariely's book, he talks about Williams-Sonoma, which is a kitchen product store in the States. And they were selling a bread oven. Right? People will come into a store, shop, and then see the bread oven and be like, okay, I don't need a bread oven. I can make bread in my regular oven. So what's the anchor here? The anchor is comparing the bread oven to your regular oven. So what they do, after months of not making any sales, they added a large bread oven to the shelf right next to a small one. So now when people came and saw the bread oven, they said, I definitely don't need the big one. I'll take the small one.
Yeah.
That was a new anchor. That small one looked like a good option in comparison to the big one. So all they did was substituted your anchor, which was the standard, which is your oven at home.
Right.
And it's crazy the way people actually bought that stuff. So when you're doing value-based pricing, you're also anchoring. You're saying, instead of comparing me to the hourly rate of the market, let me give you something else to compare it to, which is the ROI of the project. And now all of a sudden it looks good. Right? But they're still going to anchor you outside of the pricing, which is you against other people. So that's the second part of it. It's leverage. It's like, okay, maybe I'll be willing to pay value-based, but am I going to pay it to you? That's still another anchor. So the question is, what are you getting anchored to? Are you still getting anchored to 10 other designers that they believe can do the job? Forget what you believe. Forget that you see yourself as amazing and more capable of doing the job. What do they see? That's the only thing that matters. So if they see you as just another designer, you're not going to win that contract. Right. So from there, you need to build, like we said, leverage. So the way I put anchoring into play is I try to go out of my way to have a discovery phase, which is a 2-week process. And it's important that it's long enough. I can't say this enough. Like some people are like, oh, I tried the discovery phase. It didn't help. And I was like, how long was it? Oh, we did a workshop for 3 hours. That's not enough. In essence, what you're trying to do is, it's not about doing 100 hours worth of work. Even if you do 10 hours worth of work over the course of 2 weeks, it's better than doing 3 hours in one day.
Right.
The point of it is you want to have enough time to make yourself familiar to them. Right. Which brings me back to the thing that I was saying is trust over talent. Right. For every minute that you're trying to pitch how talented you are, you could have spent another minute building trust. And trust is actually way easier to build than proving talent, because talent is subjective. Right. So how do you build trust?
How do you build trust, Didi?
Why do you trust your psychologist if you have one?
It usually comes from either references are very strong, or just like personal experience. Like if I've worked with him and he already solved the problem, obviously I'll trust him.
Wait, but your psychologist?
I guess, no?
Well, why do people trust their psychologist?
Because he helped them already, or they already told him a bunch of stuff?
Well, if you really think about it, I don't
know. By the way, I just have to say I never went to a psychologist, so I don't know.
So most people trust their psychologist on one premise, is because they do the one thing nobody else does, which is listen.
Right. Okay.
If you ask a psychologist, how do you solve your client's problems? They'll directly tell you, I don't solve their problems.
Okay.
Right? And yet they get paid. And
damn, I was so naive thinking psychologist solves people's problems.
No, I mean, problems get solved via psychologists, but not by psychologists deliberately solving the problem.
Right.
So in the sales process, throughout the discovery phase, the way you build trust is simply by being observant, asking questions, making the client feel understood, making them feel heard.
Right.
That's it. Good book for that is Just Listen.
Okay.
Really
writing that one, because I never read that one.
That one's an amazing book. Cool. And I promise this stuff works also with your girlfriend.
I also try this with my wife all the time, and I'm like I read the negotiation book. I forgot which one was it, but the one with the FBI guy, Never Split the Difference. And then I tried a bunch of stuff on her, like the active listening and stuff, and she was like, are you trying a new tactic that you learned in a book on me? She can definitely recognize that. Yeah. Cool, Didi. So here's one more thing that I want to talk with you. You're basically, you're a designer and you present yourself as a designer, but you've made kind of you step up in the value chain for your clients really quickly to get into a position of, sometimes you're VP product or something like that in terms, or you're building their teams and processes. Can you share a little bit about, how that happens, how you started doing this and how it works for you usually? Because you don't position yourself like on your website. And I think you also told me when you meet clients for the first time, like, what's the, I'm a consultant or I'm a VP product or something like that.
Yeah. Sales 101, don't sell people things they don't already perceive they need.
Okay.
Right. And you have to pick your target audience. My target audience is early stage startups, right? And because of that, early stage startups don't genuinely understand the concept of consultants yet. They're just not mature yet. The founders, they believe in practitioners. They believe, okay, we need engineers, we need designers. That's what they believe. That's the language they speak, right? Okay. So you're not getting into the door if you call yourself a consultant or a strategist or something fluffy.
Okay.
You might get into the door if you're working with much bigger companies. I don't want to work with big conglomerates. I really have no interest in that. There's too much politics. I hate those massive companies. Not hate is a strong word. I don't feel like you can influence enough.
Right.
Right. Okay. I don't like working in the margins.
Right.
So if you're working with early stage startups, for me, it's post Series A. It's usually when they have like a team of 10, not while they're in their seed round. Then I position myself as a designer, because at that stage, they understand the
That's
meaning.
What they're looking for.
That's what they're looking for. That's what they believe they need, which is designers and engineers. That's the capacity of which they can take in. So I do that. And then they have a meeting with me, and then they talk to me about their problems, and I just observe, and then they start learning more about their problems, and all of a sudden they realize how it's a massive strategic thing, and how it would be a complete waste of my time to do the design, and they need me to be the strategist because they couldn't figure this all out by themselves. And before you know it, they're like, okay, just go find some junior designer, manage him, and run this entire project for us.
So it's not actually, you don't go in as designer and then step up. During this discovery phase and the sales phase, they change the perception of you.
A lot of times, yes. Sometimes I do the design work.
Yeah.
I really enjoy doing the design work. Depends on the project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one more thing I want to cover with you is networking. I think you're super, super good with networking. And we've mentioned like how you reached out to me when you came to Israel, and built really a big, like, I think now everybody knows you and you know everybody here. But besides like networking with other designers, you are also good at meeting and networking with clients and kind of like turning them into leads. Can you share a little bit about that process? Because I approach that very different from the way that you do it. So I think a lot of people can learn from how you do it.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the backstory as to how I got into that. When I first came to Israel, I was trying to create my own product. I quickly knew I was going to run out of savings, so I had to like subsidize my income with some freelance work. But since I wanted to focus on building my product, I really did not want to find myself in 40-hour weeks doing freelance. So the question I was toying with was how do you make enough money to pay the bills, which was for me around like $4,000 or $5,000 a month, while working less than 5 hours a week. I guess it was the Peter Thiel question in reverse, right? Peter Thiel asked, how do you take your 10-year goal and make it happen in 6 months? Now, the purpose of this question is not so to say 10 years worth of work can be done in 6 months. It's you ask the question so that way you really push yourself to come up with much, much, much better solutions that are way more clever, right? So I kind of found myself in that situation where I was pushing myself to be profitable with much, much, much less time. So standard methods did not work. And when I looked at the possible routes, I was like, okay, do I need to become popular in Dribble? And if I become popular in Dribble, how long would that take? Okay, nope, that's not gonna do it. It's so far out of my control. And then I said, how many clients do I need in order to cover that? I was like, 1 or 2. So I was like, that's not a big number. How do I get just 1 or 2 clients? Now, when I was working on the product at the time, I was trying to create a CRM, client relationship management tool for real estate agents. So I was reading endless amount of books on real estate sales.
Okay. And
I learned a lot about how they generate leads. And one of the books I read that influenced a lot of my process was The $1 Million Real Estate Agent.
Okay.
All these
$1 million books.
They're cheesy, but they sell. But he had some really, really good insight in that. And he looked at the entire funnel of how you go from getting coffees and how many coffees generate enough prospect leads and how many of those turn into contracts. He just plays a number game. And you just work it backwards. It's like for every, say, I don't know, every 100 coffees you get 10 potential leads. For every 10 potential leads, you get 5, good opportunities. And for every 5, 1 goes into contract.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you get 300 coffees. I don't know. It's not those numbers. It's way lower. Right. The top of the funnel is not that high. But that's how I played it. So I learned a lot about that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, this sounds like a much better approach. And then I said, I can't meet 300 people. Right. So I was like, what if
Plus you're in a new country and maybe you don't know as many people.
Right. I didn't know a lot of people. I didn't know anybody. I came to Israel about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So I said, all right, I'm sure out of the 300, a lot of them are noise and could be vetted and said they're for sure not going to go anywhere. So how do I say take 300 and break that down to the 50 most effective?
By the way, at that point, were you already clear about who you want to work with? Like you've explained now, I want to work with startup companies, post Series A. Were you clear on that at that point as well?
It was a little more vague. I said I wanted to do advisory work for early stage companies.
Okay.
Right. So, I pretty much said, hey, who are the most important people to me? And I sat down
in the startup ecosystem,
Who are the people that if I met them, those would be referred as like rainmakers. They're the people that give you endless referrals that constantly are going to send you business. Let me start with just those.
How do you find them? Or how did you understand who they were?
So I said I'm going to start with the VCs.
Okay.
The VCs are the most impactful. If you ever got introduced via VC to a portfolio...
VC, for people who don't know, are venture capitalists. They are the investors in designers, in startups. Yeah. So they know a lot of the startups.
Exactly.
Right. And they're very powerful because they give out the money.
They give out the money. So if you ever got introduced from a venture capitalist to one of their portfolio companies is a company they've invested in, it's almost like being introduced via God himself.
Right.
Okay. So,
it's not only introduced. I'm right now working with a client who's been introduced by a VC to me, and it's like, imagine it's like your God tells you this is who you should be working with. You almost don't even think about this because you don't want to disappoint your investor, right? You have to do this at this point.
So I did that.
So how do you get to know the investors, like the VCs in Israel? What was the approach for that? Let's
see. Roy No, not Roy. That he didn't introduce me. All right, forget names. I have a friend.
Right.
Who, let's see. Actually, no. Now I remember. So the way I got to my first investor in Israel was actually really random. Which is a really important thing to highlight because he'd be surprised where these things come from. When I was doing the real estate app, I started talking to a bunch of people in real estate. And one of the people I met in real estate in New York, he said, "Oh, you're moving to Israel. You should definitely meet my friend. He's in the startup scene." He actually doesn't know anything about startups himself. But he said, "My friend, I know he invests in startups. Big guy in startups, investor." I'm like, okay, cool. So he introduces me to this guy who's a major investor in a Jerusalem fund. And I meet the guy.
Which one? What's his name?
His name is Ronan Grobman.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah.
He's at JGV.
Yeah.
Not JVP, JGV, Jerusalem Global Ventures.
Right.
They're a late stage firm. So they don't invest Series A, they invest Series D like pre-exit. They've invested in Move It.
Right.
I think like 20 million.
Yeah. I know them.
So I got introduced to him and instantly hit it off. So I have a background, I grew up very religious. And he's a religious dude. So we had coffee and I remember that's what we spoke about. We just spoke about like what my path was, how I went from being religious to non-religious, how I ended up in tech, moved to San Francisco. It was just our story. And I really aimed to make friends. It's the only thing I wanted to do. So I met him and he became a close friend of mine. And from him, he introduced me to other VCs.
Were you like asking him on purpose or it just happened naturally?
No, once I was his friend, I asked him, I'm like, hey, I'm trying to meet other people in the tech space. But he was my friend and he generally saw me as someone who was talented. He enjoyed the conversation. He was impressed with me. Mm-hmm. And when I spoke to him, I literally spoke about religion. I barely spoke about tech.
Right.
Which is, again, how you influence people or how people see you is not rational.
Of course. They probably know more about religion than they are about talent or design, specifically about your craft. And so they might find you knowledgeable or trustworthy based on what you say on other topics.
He found me relatable and trustworthy. And because of that, in his mind, it was like, that's enough to open up my network. And he put me in touch with people at Aleph. He put me in touch with people at JVP, which are two of the biggest investment houses in Israel. And there weren't like assistants. These were partners, right? Partners at the firm. They have better things to do with their time. And you were
like, hey, let's get coffee together or
no agenda,
like that? Right.
No agenda. Have you ever gotten a meeting with an investor with absolutely zero agenda except I just want to meet?
But honestly, I have to say, like specifically investors, they are trying to meet a lot of people just to have people in their networks because investors are networkers as well. That's part of their job.
I agree, but they're not going to give an hour of their time to someone random.
Right.
So there has to be an agenda. So it doesn't matter that, yes, they are networkers. They're still going to prioritize their time. They have a limited amount of time and they're very, very busy people.
Right.
So yes, they do need to network, but they need to do that consciously. They can't just meet everybody.
Yeah.
So when I got introduced through a mutual friend, I'm familiar. That is leverage.
Right.
So coming from a place of power,
it's not like it's just like emailing them, hey, please meet me for coffee.
Exactly. Right. Ranan made an introduction and said, hey, I think you two should meet. You guys will really enjoy a conversation together. Feel free to move me to BCC.
Yeah.
I think that's like the extent of all those intros. And, these people would just respond within a day. Okay, if Ranan says so, must be a really cool guy. Let's meet.
Yeah.
Met investors like JVP, like the biggest partners, Aleph, same thing. And they introduced me to some of their portfolio companies. And one of them became a client, but this is like sort of how it kind of went down.
Yeah.
So how do I do this more
on a process level?
Process level.
Yeah.
I have a thing I call a hit list. Let's start with the top. There's a contact list, there's a short list, and then there's a hit list.
Okay.
Right? That's the funnel.
Okay. So on the top, there's
a contact list, everybody you know.
Contact? Okay. Yeah. Contact.
I wouldn't recommend you putting everybody you know into a spreadsheet. So start with the short list.
Okay.
The relevant people.
Short list?
So a short list is anybody who stands to help you progress in your career.
Okay.
Right.
And you manage them. I actually saw a screenshot. You do this in Airtable or something like that.
I used to do it in Airtable.
Okay.
You can do it in any kind of spreadsheet.
Okay. So you have a short list. Then what's below that?
And then there's a hit list.
Hit list. Okay.
A hit list is pretty much everybody on your short list that you haven't met that you want to meet.
Okay.
Right. People that.
So those are the people that you're targeting right now. Okay.
Yeah. So the way I put people into my database, my Excel sheet, is really simple. I put their name, their link to their LinkedIn, the relationship status, and then their network strength. Right? These are like
relationship status. You and them, right? Not married.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So now I'll break that down. Right. Relationship status breaks down for me into haven't met, needs intro.
Okay.
Haven't met, introed. Met, leverageable, VIP.
Wow. That's
okay.
Okay.
So
first few makes sense. What is leverageable?
Leverageable simply means if I went to them and asked them to introduce me to somebody they know, they would.
Right. Okay. And what's VIP?
VIP means go out of your way to get coffee with them at least once a month or once every 2 months to keep that relationship very healthy. These are your rainmakers. Okay. These are the people that it just shouldn't be a lot of people on this list. There should be like a groomed 10-person list. These are people you send, happy holiday cards to if you're old school, or just an email, but just really try to stay on their radar.
Right.
Right. Friendships, and then they take work. And that's the way I see it. These are friendships. Every person that I have on that list, including you, I am friends with.
I'm on the VIP or leverageable?
Just kidding. You're actually on VIP. You're actually on VIP.
That's awesome.
I really generally see every person on that list as a friendship, and they take work to nourish. I can't be in 1,000 places at once, and I have to prioritize my time. So that's how I break it down. Then there's network strength. Network strength is really simple: weak, mediocre, strong, influencer.
Okay.
Right. Their network strength is pretty much how much reach do they have.
Right.
Because you need both of these elements. If you have a if you have a leverageable relationship with someone who has a weak network strength,
that's not going to do
X them out of the list. Right. It's not going to do you much favors.
Right.
And that list is something that takes manual work. I spend an hour or two like every week grooming it and all this different stuff. So if you want to keep it, if you want it to continuously produce fruit from your labor, you need to keep it focused. Yeah. So that's why I measure both things. If someone's an influencer and you have a leverageable relationship, try to get them into VIP. VIP influencer is great.
Yeah.
And then met just means you met them either for coffee or over a Skype call. It was like an intimate, like 30-minute chat. But you just don't feel like the relationship has graduated to a point where if you ask them for an introduction, they'd really stick their head out for you.
Yeah.
So
not there yet.
Yeah. So if somebody has a really strong network and it's set to met, you want to work on getting that to a leverageable place.
Yeah.
Right. So that's pretty much how I do it in a nutshell. That's pretty much it. And then you just continuously work through that, and you get enough coffees, you work that network, enough coffees. I think for me, the pipeline is really simple. New contacts, right? How many people I add to that list? So new contacts. Coffee meetings had, to opportunities generated, opportunities prospected, proposals sent, contract signed, active clients, monthly revenue.
And you track those numbers like weekly, monthly?
I track those numbers bi-monthly.
All right.
But I work on these numbers every week.
Right. All right, there's honestly a lot more that I wanted to cover, but we're like reaching the end of our time. So just like last question, what do you think most designers get wrong when it comes to their business? Or what is everybody's missing besides, finding it hard to value price?
You're not as entrepreneurial as you think you are.
What does that mean?
Design is not business. Business is business, right? Business is a bigger practice than design. Being a better designer does not make you better at business. It doesn't make you more profitable in a lot of instances. Some people get lucky, like where something they created gets an award, and from there, like their fame lasts for a couple of years, and people are just coming their way. And even though those instances, it's not always good, because then you always have like 100 emails that you have to process, and for every 100 there's usually only one that's a good client. Right. Business operations is something to take very seriously. If 20% of your time is not spent working on your business, not working on with clients, you're doing it wrong. And you should definitely make time, even if it's once a week. For me, I do it on Fridays. I try to get to my desk at 6 a.m. on Fridays. And between 6 and 9, I review the work of the week, plan the next week, look at my contact list, see who I want to get meetings with, start sending out emails and coordinating my schedule for the following week and how I'm going to network, who I'm going to meet, all this different stuff. If you're not blocking out time to do it, it's not going to happen. Don't expect it to happen. It's something you're going to naturally avoid. I personally hate doing this. I'm good at it, sure, but I hate doing it. If I stop doing it for a week or two, like if I'm on vacation, I find that I get back into designing very quickly, and then I delay all of these business efforts for like at least a month. I'm not any less human than you are, but really push yourself to do it and read some business books. You know, like I think if you're in the service industry, read books about anything on service. Like it doesn't matter if it's a real estate agent book. It doesn't matter if it's a, about design and servicing. The service industry in a nutshell, and I guess this would be a really, really good way to cap everything. It's relationships. Your job is not to create good designs. It's to nourish and create really long-lasting relationships. I have a lot of really good relationships with clients that I would say I didn't do the best design work for. Right? They decided they wanted this ugly color. Okay, did I service them the best I could? No, but my relationship is in really, really good health. Right? So understand that these concepts are not exclusively mutual. If you do the best design, it doesn't mean you'll have the best relationship. And if you focus on the relationship, you'll have an abundance of referrals, megaphones. Like you just turn your clients into megaphones. They're just gonna jump about you to like everyone. And that's the way to measure the health of a business. So just focus on the relationship, not just design.
Awesome, dude. So thanks so much for coming to the show.
Absolutely.
There's a lot more, so I think we'll do another episode soon. In the meanwhile, if people look you up online or something, where should they look to find you? Or
so I am not on social media. You can find me on Facebook. I'm not active on any social media platform, unfortunately. You can go to my website at didimedina.com. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to get coffee or have a call. I also have a course that I'm working on that I'm looking forward to releasing in the next few months called Freelance Inc., which is a masterclass, an online masterclass that's going to be teaching freelancers, both designers and developers, business operations, and all of my methods and practices of how to work on your business. So looking forward to releasing that. And
awesome. We'll do something together on that for sure. All right, dude.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Absolutely. Bye.